Hey, some of you have said you had some trouble with the add and subtract radical part. So these notes are from mathbitsnotebook.com, and I'm going to try to briefly explain how to do that. So if I were teaching a lesson, it would go something like this. When you're adding and subtracting radicals, it's the same concept of adding and subtracting like terms. For example, if I have 2x plus 3x squared, I could not combine them because they are not like terms. If I had a 2x plus 3x, they are like, so it would be 5x. That is all that statement said. So now moving on, the index for radicals, the index, and if you remember what the index is, the number, the small number, the root, and the value under the radicand, which is called the radicand, has to be the same in order to add and subtract. So looking at example 1, I have 3 radical 5 plus 4 radical 5. So I ask myself, are the radicands the same? Yes. Are the indexes the same? Yes, remember if we don't see the index, it's a 2. So we've got that. So now, if I can add my 3 plus my 4, if I have 3 radical 5s and I add 4 radical 5s, I get 7 radical 5s. Example 2 here. I have 5 radical 7 plus 3 radical 11. And I'm looking at the radicands. They're not the same, even though my indexes are. But I can't break down either one of those any further or simplify like we just did in the previous lesson. So I have to leave my answer just like that. It's 5 radical 7 plus 3 radical 11. All right, so let's get a little bit deeper. I have 2 radical 3 plus 4 radical 75. Now, thinking of my perfect squares, if you remember our perfect squares, we had 2 squared is 4. 4 is the perfect square. Let me jump down to 4 squared. That's 16. 16 is a perfect square. What's 5 squared? 25. 25 is the perfect square, so on and so forth. So I'm thinking that 75 has to break down, or it should break down because I'm familiar with the number, into one of these factors of, I didn't say that right, 75 has a perfect square that will go into it. So I want the largest perfect square, and I know if I think dollars and cents, 75 breaks down to radical 25 times 3. Well, what is the square root of 25? Well, I made it a perfect square so I could bring it out. So I have 5 and my radical 3. Now, are there any numbers outside of the radical symbol? I've got a 5 and I've got that 4 there. So if you remember, you multiply those numbers. So 4 radical 75 breaks down to 4 times 5, which is 20, radical 3. So now I'm going to take my 20 radical 3 and I'm going to add my 2 radical 3 to it because I've got a plus here, it's a positive. So what's 2 radical 3s plus 20 radical 3s? I get 22 radical 3s. Example 4 here, the only radicands that are the same are the radical 3s, and remember there's a 1 out here if you don't see it. So I have 6 radical 3s plus 1 radical 3, which gives me 7 radical 3s. And I have a 4 radical 2 that will not combine with everything, so your final answer is that. The last one I want to show you, and then I'll do some examples in another video from your homework, because this is running a little bit long. So looking at 6 radical 2, I know 2 won't break down. 3 radical 8, I should remember that that radical 8 will break down. The square root of 4 times the square root of 2. which is square root of 4 is what? You can tell me that. 2 radical 2. Is there a number outside? There's a 2 here and a 3 here. So what does negative 3 radical 8 break down to? It breaks down to 3 times 2, which is 6, and I bring my radical 2 that I just simplified down. So 8 becomes 4, radical 4 times radical 2. The radical 4 becomes a 2. I have an outside number here and here. Multiply them together to get your 6 and bring down your radical 2. So I'm going to rewrite it down here instead of looking at the example, all that stuff that's written there. So I have 6 radical 2 minus, I just brought down the sign, 6 radical 2 plus, all right, now I need to think about that 32. I'm going to do that over here, radical 32. I've got a 2 outside. That will break down. Let me find a perfect square that will go into 32. And again, I want the largest one, so I'm going to see if 16 will go into 32. So doing that, let's see, 16 times 2, I don't have a calculator up here. I think that works. 12, 32, so radical 16 times 2. What is the square root of 16? Remember, 16 is 4 squared. So this becomes a 4 radical 2. I have a number outside. What do I do with those? You multiply them. So 8 radical 2. So I'm going to bring my 8 radical 2 over. So plus 8 radical 2. Now I'm going to combine my like terms because all my radicans are the same. All my indexes are the same. So when adding those, I have a 6 radical 2. Take away 6 radical 2. Well, those are 0 plus an 8 radical 2. So my answer is 0 plus 8 radical 2, which is simply, sorry, I lost my pen, which is simply 8 radical 2 for your final answer. I hope this helps. I'm going to do some practice videos next.